Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining our session. My name is Ruxanda, and my counterpart is Ana Gabriele, and together we are representatives of the City of Atlanta and also co-founders of the Urban Catalyst Lab. So in 2016, we have met at Habitat Free in Quito, and no, we did not meet during our many speaker roles, engagements, or other roles that we have undertaken at the session, at the conference, but it was rather our very stubborn determination of finding free coffee that really brought us together. So next time when you are meeting somebody for a coffee, be very mindful. It might be your next business partner. So 1 year in, we met again in Atlanta at the Center for Civil and Human Rights. That's us here. And that's the moment that really spurred our attention. It was the local art scene of Atlanta, which is so much rooted in social justice, in civil rights movement, and many other aspects of the sustainability and resilience narrative. So because of that, and because of a very ambitious resilience plan of the City of Atlanta that we'll be diving in more deeper next, we started to work very closely with the Mayor's Office of Resilience and Office of Cultural Affairs towards magnifying the local art scene of Atlanta and creating linkages with other cities that are utilizing art as a tool to further and implement their resilience plan. So, but let's just zoom out for a moment. We're here at the World Urban Forum today, right? So we hope that because of that, all of us are very inspired by the Earth, by our planet, and rather not intimidated by its magnitude, but very much inspired and passionate by the decentralized model of the cities that is so much emphasized during many of the global frameworks, such as the New Urban Agenda, Agenda 2030, Sendai Framework, Paris Agreement for Climate Change, to name a few. And we believe that you all guys are aware of the fact that every day there are 1.4 million people moving into the cities. So by 2030, there is no doubt that we'll probably reach more than 70% of the world's population living in cities. This is why we're here today at World Urban Forum, really trying to implement more resilience plans and to strengthen the urban resilience and sustainability. And Atlanta is no foreign to that. In fact, the city in itself has chosen, it's such a progressive city to the point that it has chosen so many times progressive ideas at the expense of the city's demolition. An example as such, of course, is the civil rights movement, which not only changed the trace of history of the American identity, but it also inspired and changed the history at the planetary level, inspiring so many other movements for freedom around the world. Here is Mayor Kasim Reed, the former mayor of Atlanta, speaking about Atlanta, saying that Atlanta became from segregation and Jim Crow to the cradle of the civil rights movement, from a railroad terminus to the most traveled airport in the world. So as we can see, Atlanta has never been envisioned as a big city. However, it always made a big impact to the society of the US and globally, to the point that it became the city of today, which will be growing even more in the upcoming years. So Atlanta, we just mentioned that it was at the forefront of the civil rights movement, and it is at the forefront of the civil rights movement. It also brought in so many other innovations and contributed to the culture of the humanity in the US. It was the place where Olympics took place. It also is a place where many of the urban development innovations happened. An example as such is Beltline. The Beltline is not only a place that inspires and preserves the tree canopy, but it also is a place of inclusiveness for all the people, all the locals from Atlanta to come together and not only create bonds with the nature and the environment, and it's not only inspiring the walkability and biking and other means of transportation but it also brings them closer to many of the identity dialogues, and it fosters social cohesion through public art. Atlanta is also one of the cities that is contributing to the music industry. Many of the artists today being from Atlanta. It's also at the forefront of the tech innovation, and in 2015 was #1 city in the United States by production of film in the film industry. As well as Atlanta is the #3 in the United States today in terms of the concentration of corporation headquarters. And just not to forget that when it comes to the refugees, Atlanta has the largest refugee camp in the United States. This is just of course, a very high-level image of Atlanta and its contributions. But when it comes to the policy, Atlanta is also very progressive in that regards too. In fact, Atlanta was the only major city from the Southeast region that participated at COP21 and not only signed on the Paris Agreement, but made the commitment for 100% renewable energy by 2035, which made her the 27th city in the United States to have such a progressive vision and commitment. Also, in its early stages in the implementation of this vision, Atlanta is already the #1 in the participation of the Department of Energy Better Buildings Challenge, meeting its requirements 3 years before the deadline. Atlanta is also taking a very progressive stand in including more solar panels and LED lighting to cut the CO2 emissions in the public spaces. We have heard about the former mayor's remarks on Atlanta's identity and the resilience as a city. And the actual mayor of today that joined the office in December, Mayor Keisha Lance, is not any stranger to the resilience plan neither. She's in fact furthering and is implementing this plan, continuing the former mayor's legacies in these regards. And of course, as women, we are so proud to see a female mayor joining the office, which makes her the #2 female mayors of Atlanta ever and the 20th nationwide. So Atlanta we've spoken a bit about the history of Atlanta and how it is already emphasizing the city as a resilient city. Well, last year, Atlanta also joined the 100 Resilient Cities Network. And it has some very progressive visions in these regards. We won't go through all of them, but just to mention a few of the targets, particularly in the Vision 1, Atlanta is seeing herself and making the commitment of becoming the center of and having a leading role in addressing the structural racism in the United States. And it's also looking at arts as a means of bridging that gap. And it's looking at creating the arts and culture industry as one of the most growing industries by 2025 in Atlanta, next to the film industry and music industry. Atlanta is also another impressive target, looking at having every Atlantan close to or around less than half mile away from a fresh food source by 2025. And of course, we've heard already about the climate change commitment. So these are a few highlights of its resilient targets. Another one not to forget is that the city of Atlanta is looking at having around 500 acres of land, of public land, being transformed into green spaces.
Now this is, wait, do you hear me? Okay. Now this is where the interesting part actually is. So the Atlanta Resilience Plan was developed by consulting 7,000 Atlantan residents in multi-stakeholders consultations, focus groups. and different serving methods. And the visions that you see here were developed based on the input that the 7,000 residents provided. Interestingly, if we look at the Atlanta's past and its vision for the future, we can see that there is a very special role for culture in achieving resilience. The Vision 1, Preserve and Celebrate Who We Are, has specific cultural targets in it. One of them is supporting policies and systems to increase civic participation from Metro Atlantans and documenting and sharing the stories of Atlanta's 222 communities. So another vision that strongly aligns with cultural targets is that they really pursue resilience through promoting social cohesion and addressing inequity and inequalities. So it's about increasing participation, celebrating culture, and promoting social cohesion as a way to achieve the resilience vision. So this transitions us to explore more what is Atlanta's cultural scene nowadays and how it can align and does align currently with some of the resilience goals and visions that the city has.
Yes. And this is some of the artists that we mapped up in terms of the sustainability and resilience dialogues. There are many of them. With a representative of the older generation, Joe Minter. In fact, he was one of the civil rights survivors. And as you can see, he's not only delivering a very progressive vision on the civil rights movement and social justice, connecting it to actually human rights. Although he doesn't have a PhD, he has a very broad vision towards the world. He's also using recycling materials when creating this sort of contemporary and visual art. You can see here from the picture how impassioned he is keeping the young audience around him when speaking about civil rights movement. Another artist that we work closely with and the representative of the younger generation is William Macy. He's one of the Bell Line artists, and as you can see from this piece, which is one of our favorites, he's looking at the identity of the Atlantan, really emphasizing the diversity of it, the past and the present and the future. And as you go closer to the art piece, you can see how it is made out of many of the found objects from the community, including shovels and a sandal and a part of a lost part from a car, and all of these objects being found by homeless people. So he recruited homeless people to be his assistants in this art intervention. And in addition, you also can see the auto-portraits of these homeless people on this particular installation as you come closer. So we believe that this is a great example that shows the beauty of the past and present and future of Atlantan identity, while also tackling some of the most sophisticated and sometimes uncomfortable issues, such as addressing the homelessness in the city of Atlanta, in the public space. So this sculpture was installed on the Bell Line. Another artist who is also a very strong activist when it comes to social justice and affordable housing, who is also playing such an important role in many of the policy changes at the local level in Atlanta, is Fabian Williams, with whom we're collaborating. Here's a piece of his art at one of the libraries where he's raising awareness on education. But many of his pieces are throughout the city of Atlanta, where he's really sometimes criticizing, sometimes raising awareness on the inequalities that are happening within the city. Barry Eel is another fascinating artist who used his disability who explored himself as a person to raise awareness for the disabled in the United States and in Atlanta. Shaniqua Gay is another phenomenal artist who was also commissioned by the former First Lady Michelle Obama in some of the receptions that the First Lady had. And Shaniqua Gay, what she is doing, I like to call herself a poet of Atlanta. She's using many of his metaphors, like deer, to emphasize the purity of a fighter, of the activists in any of the Atlantans fighting for equality. This particular piece is rooted in social justice, of course, and the past of the civil rights movement in Atlanta. Saifa is another amazing artist who is actually taking a stand in raising awareness about the quirky black artists of Atlanta. She's using, again, found objects and repurposing them, recreating them into pieces of art. She's also creating collages. And she is tackling issues like social inequalities and the importance of having a space, formal and informal, for quirky artists. On the other side of the spectrum is Ross Boone, who many of you might know that Atlanta and many cities in the South are called many times as a church belt. So he is very much rooted in the Christian and the faith, interfaith communities, and is working very closely with those communities to address some of inequalities through his illustrations. Joe King is an artist that is also, like William, doing community interventions in a very participatory way. One of our favorite pieces is where he's bringing together children and the club, the Boys and Girls Club, to create placemaking and boost the identity of those children and create bridges in between the many generations of Atlantans. Masood, he's a very interesting artist since he's an actor and is very much triggered by the mixed materials. So this one is actually a sound installation as well. It's a mixed installation where you can hear the noise made by the black bees. The black bees are known for their power of creating very strong communities. He's using this metaphor to emphasize the struggle, yet the beauty of the strength of the community of the black people during the civil rights movement, while mixing it with some of the chanting of the women of those communities. Meredith Coy is a transdisciplinary artist who also bridges her art with the science and academia and curatorial practices. And what she does, she never was aware about the structural racism before moving to Atlanta. So she changed all her body of work in order to address this issue in Atlanta, and works very closely with neighborhoods, almost like a community leader, to facilitate conversations and performance art pieces.
So far we talked a little bit about Atlanta's resilience, vision, and goals, and we talked how there is a body, a cohort of artists in Atlanta, so-called community artists, who already in their work are exploring the similar topics as Atlanta's local government is in their programmatic work. And here we uncover that actually in Atlanta, this resilience vision of integrating culture into resilient development, and especially having art play a role in the policy, in city policies, is not a totally new thing. In Atlanta, there has been in the past art has dominated in city policies. So art and culture is not a separated sector. It was mapped out onto economics, policy, and foreign affairs. It often facilitated dialogue and grassroots action for policy change, and it facilitated feedback to certain policy changes. And here on the point one is that Bureau of Cultural Affairs in Atlanta was actually the body that controlled the federal funds in 80s, Reagan's Comprehensive Employment and Training Act funds, to address public unemployment due to recession. So the Cultural Bureau, what it did, it channeled most of those funds to create to put the local artists on a payroll, many of which remained on the payroll until nowadays, and many of these artists were self-identified Black artists in Atlanta, whose art has been, because of discrimination, and hasn't received before so much public traction as it did, and hasn't received so much funds as it did, as their art was more oriented to community engagement and addressing very difficult issues. So these funds enabled to create spaces in Atlanta, publicly funded spaces where the artists could create. Atlanta, the Bureau of Cultural Affairs was also the one to develop that very ambitious but highly successful 1996 hosting of the Olympics plan, and the whole United States was quite surprised in the world that Atlanta became the host of the Olympics, and a very successful one. Talking about initiating grassroots policy change, I don't know about you, but I come from a generation where Captain Planet, the cartoon in the 90s, was my thing. I loved it. Born in Atlanta by Ted Turner Foundation, that's very oriented to environmental policy and fighting climate change. They were the ones who created this cartoon in order to target the youth and initiate a mentality change in them to start thinking about the climate change and environment. Right? This foundation is currently distributing grants to the youth. So grassroots level grants for youth initiatives are also targeting environmental protection. Also, one interesting thing is that Captain Planet's team was very global. Right. They had one of the team members was from Ghana, one from United States, one from Soviet Union, one from China, and one from Brazil. So it's already this orientation of Atlanta celebrating its diversity, but also connecting to the global diversity. Art and Recycling Whale Shark Project is something that the current government is implementing with Georgia Tech.
Right, and it's a very interesting collaboration in this fact. It's also intergenerational, and it's also interdisciplinary. So these two leading artists are in fact also working in science and engineering, and our artists as well are international and local. And what they are doing, they are raising awareness about oceans, but also the whale shark. This particular installation will be placed at the aquarium, which many of you might know that Atlanta Zoo Aquarium is the second largest in the world. And the installation will be made out of recycling materials, but also featuring sound installation and music, so it will be very interactive, and it will play a key role in disseminating awareness about whale sharks and oceans.
And on the third point, how art becomes a way for communities to respond to a policy change or or city program implementation. We talked about Beltline a lot, and an interesting fact is that Beltline was originally intended as social housing and mixed housing project. However, with the transition of government that often happens, there appeared a gap in supervising the project, and the real estate developers bought out the land. So it became a very luxurious housing development, and many of the local communities could not access the residences that were there. So Ross Boone, one of the artists that we talked about before, he engaged the communities in creating an art piece. It's a book that maps out which communities are still living around the Beltline and how they relate to the Beltline. So here we come into what we want to do and what we are working on with the City Council of Atlanta. We want to mobilize the existing community art scene, especially the artists that we named before are already artists that we consider in our cohort and our team, to localize the government's sustainability and resilience conversations, to localize the vision, to create feedback mechanisms for community to engage in it, to have bottom-up input to sustainability agenda. At the same time, through community-driven art, as we outlined before, we believe we can build social cohesion. We can map out communities and community members' relationship to one another by engaging them in collective creation of an art piece. We want to unveil the community culture that is there, because oftentimes, and it's one of the projects we work on right now, urban sprawl occurs because there is lack of, among other things, there's also lack of relationship and connection to the space of living. And we manifest often in Atlanta how the children move out and leave their parents behind. They leave, they go to other communities. And we want to re-engage that connection to a place through placemaking, and community art, because it's a public art, becomes a way to engage in placemaking and improve public space, among other things, which improves the public space utility value, where the community members can come together and engage with one another. And we also want, because it's a public art process, we want to promote transdisciplinary partnerships in creating pieces. Welsh Art Project is one of them. Right. But I bet Rushanda can
Yes, many times I think we hear art and culture as being its own bubble, either being very much associated with the privileged or with the with the most educated classes. And what we're trying to do is actually to bring art back to the humanity and to have art as an enabler that brings together all the other aspects and all the other industries, if you want, and sectors to work together towards the creation of the arts. So we're speaking about artists, local artists, working with global and international artists, so having city-to-city partnerships, where we're really looking at creating partnerships with cities where art is used as a tool to implement the resilience plan. But we're also looking at collaborations between artists and scientists and policy people and doctors, if you want, so, and community leaders in order to create change.
Wait. Oops, this is not, okay, no, we're missing. There's a slide missing. Oh, okay. Well, there was a slide we wanted to show you that Boys and Girls Club, the project, the work done by Joe King and Boys and Girls Club in Atlanta, because we felt it was very exemplary of what we're trying to do as well. As Boys and Girls Club is usually the kids who belong to it, they usually don't feel like they belong, and they beautified the space around engaging with the artists. To first of all, they made
sketches.
They made sketches, and then it became, the wall was like painted in faces. So it kind of marks their presence there to the public eye, but at the same time, it establishes their ownership of the space. So as Urban Catalyst Lab, working with the City Council of Atlanta, our major vision is to give art back to the humanities. So recognize the value of art as it is. It's not only a luxury item. It is a process, the transformation. It is a tool, a pathway to engage the communities in a collective creation and envisioning. It is a way to bring people together and to build social cohesion. And it's a way to explore partnerships, intercultural, interdisciplinary, local to global. It's a language that is not limited by words. It's a language that can really tackle deeper expression. Right. As if we remember the Shanika Gay's piece about the deer, it's a way to express what we care about together collectively. So our goals are, just to reinstate, to engage grassroots in sustainability and resilience agendas. We want their priorities to become publicly known. So by that, we want to engage community in community art facilitated dialogues over what is their relationship to one another, what is their relationship to the space they're in, and what are their visions and priorities for the space that they live in. We want to position Atlanta as a pioneer of community-oriented innovation and a partner to the global art advocacy and sustainability circles. So we want Atlanta's profile, and there is a profile of Atlanta being very responsive to culture, very focused on the arts. We want that to become an example to the global community as one of the ways in which we can advance our sustainability agenda. We want to create an environment for interdisciplinary artistic entrepreneurship. So this is more what Ruxandra talked about before, is how we want to take our art out of the silos and make it a public process where we bring different stakeholders to create.
Yeah, so basically what we're looking at, right, what do we want to achieve is to solidify an online platform that serves as a hub for the local community artists of Atlanta, but also it's an enabler and a connector to the community artists all around the world. So we're looking at mapping up also cities that are looking at the art as a way to implement their resilience plans, and artists that are already doing it outside in their communities, in the other cities around the world. When I speak about the offline identity, we're working towards creating a festival in Atlanta at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, art festival / lab that really celebrates the local art of community art of Atlanta and its heritage, historical heritage, its past and presence, while tracing it to the future by mapping it up and magnifying it thanks to the resilience plans that are really enabling this decentralized model of city-to-city partnerships. We're also, at the moment, until then, are creating and doing community interventions in the many of the neighborhood of Atlanta. In April, in fact, we're bringing in an Indian artist, Hanif Qureshi, who is very internationally renowned, having his body of work in many of the established museums, starting with Centre Pompidou, Venice Biennale, and also himself being a co-founder of the New Delhi Street Art Festival, and having a very strong experience in working with communities in India and internationally. So he will be working with William Macy, the other artist that we spoke about earlier, who has a strong body of work on the Bell Line in Atlanta. So he's already tackling urban resilience issues in Atlanta. They'll work together towards creating a series of community interventions in the neighborhood of Jones Creek, which is predominantly lived by white people, Indians and Chinese, which at the moment are not necessarily coexisting and collaborating together. What we're trying to do is to create a project that inspires social cohesion, brings them together, and having the outcome, which is a piece of art in a public space, which might be in the form of a mural or a sculpture, to be a celebration of the beginning of a social cohesion dialogue of this community.
Okay, right. So yes.
So
that's about us.
With that said, what we are really looking at from you guys is to bring, please jump into with us with questions and visit us online. And yes, we're looking towards collaborating with you all. Thank you.